Matt Linklater here, and I'm bringing to you the Ground Truth System. You know, everything I bring to you is how do you push the thresholds of yesterday? How do you get better each and every day? See, every day you got to push your levels of comfort so you can grow. If you're not growing, you're not getting better. And all this is about how do you dominate the day. So I want to bring you to you the Ground Truth System from Rollie Wilkins. What's really unique about this system is the other day he was talking about profiling sales teams. And one of the things I did not realize in sales is there's actually a sales profile that doesn't like to follow up. To me, this is absurd because you can write this down is the fortune is in the follow-up. The number one thing you need to do is follow up in sales. So if you intuitively know that you have a salesperson that's not following up, you're going to have to fix that. You're going to have to give them a system and a process. And the Ground Truth System identifies that and gives you the process. One thing that Rollie brought to me is employee turnover. Just by having, a 20% employee turnover, and let's just say you were looking to have a $12 million sale or a $12 billion sale, no matter what it is, it's going to wipe out about 10 to 15% of your sales goal every year just by having 20% employee turnover. Another thing is once you understand what your system is, or who your team is, I should say, and what type of turnover you have, is how do you integrate this? How do you become better? How do you fix these gaps? How do you go from where you are to where you want to be? And then more importantly on top of that is how do you break down the different silos within your business? When you have account management, you have sales rep management, internal sales, finance, management. So how do you integrate all that? And the reason I think Rollie's system is so great is because he's been there and done that. For 20 years, he carried the bag. He was a divisional sales manager, national sales manager, and a global sales manager. And so when you think about that and you bring this type of expertise, you know that you're going to get great success. Some of the results that he sees is 150% growth from the previous year's sales. He was able to shrink the size of teams to make it more efficient. So reduce your headcount and become more efficient. And then all of this is how do you align all your teams? And then when you start aligning all your teams, you're going to shorten that onboarding time for your for your outside sales, for your internal sales, and you're going to be able to integrate all those different silos. So that's just a little bit of what I know that Rollie has done and what he has done for me. And so really, Rollie, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Matt. Great to spend some time with you yesterday and then today as well.
Yeah, very cool, man. I mean, we shared a lot of great ideas off microphone, if you will, and so I'm, really interested to hear them again and to deliver this message. So why don't you start out? Tell me how you came about to today and developing the Ground Truth System, and what is it?
Yeah, so, years ago when I started out in sales, it was a different world. And so coming up in sales as a sales rep, there's a lot of training available for us. There's a lot of point of sale. How do you overcome objections? What are the top 5 sales objections you're going to get? And it assumes that everybody's an outside sales rep. And it assumes that you're setting your own appointments, and it assumes you're following up and close them and sometimes servicing those accounts. So it's one thing to learn how to be a high-performing sales rep. What I found is the higher that I went in management, so what do? We take our top-performing sales rep and we make them a sales manager. And the challenge with that is we give them no training. So it'd be like taking a Division I athlete, making him GM of a professional sports team. You wouldn't do that. Nor would you expect a high-performing sales rep, to go to your organization and start performing from day one, but we do. And so, my background was I started vacuum sales door to door, worked my way into B2B sales, spent 6 years in the Marine Corps before then as a combat journalist. After that, went into the business world, promoted up through within. And at every one of those levels, I had to go and self-seek and self-search, meaning there was very little insight given when I became a sales manager, or even less when I got promoted to sales director or VP. So, going from that manager to the national manager to having international responsibility, my roles changed, but there was no training available.
Yep.
And so where does that impact a company? It's the bottom line. I mean, one of the things was I always tried to hire people like me. And, there's 18 different ways you could say behavioral trait profiles to be really effective. But when you try to hire people just like you, it's like the Seinfeld episode where, the guy dated a girl just like him and then he, broke up with her because he couldn't stand her.
Yeah.
And so, the person that's going to be successful in that sales role may not be successful in a management role. And what you hit on earlier is that there's multiple different types of sales reps. So there are sales reps who are really good at driving that new business. There's sales reps who are really good at following up and managing the accounts. And then there's the ones that are really better suited for management and develop other people. And so when you take all three of those different archetypes, and I'm simplifying here, you've got three different behavioral profiles. You got three different people. And if you have the wrong one at the wrong seat at the wrong time, there's no way your business can grow.
Yep. There's so much to unpack there with what you just said, and it's 100% true. And, being a small business owner and running my businesses, it's funny because, I have a finance person, I have a assistant, and sometimes, my brother, who's my partner, is he'll notice I don't have patience with a lot of people. It's just my profile, as you kind of alluded to. But I have so much patience for my finance guy and my accountant. And the reason I do is because I don't want them to be like me. And it's taken me some time to realize that. So it's really important to, one, realize that, but also understand what are the differences within your sales team so you can be a more effective manager. And two quick things is the training. So when I got into sales, there was no training. When I got into external sales, I was making like $250,000, and nobody traveled with me for 6 months, and there was no training. Mm-hmm. And then you could see, somebody near to me has somebody new in management, and they have no idea what they're doing. So this isn't, and the person near and dear to me has a $400,000 outside sales job, and there's not a whole lot of accountability on their end, although they're awesome, but the company's accountability is low, and then there's not a whole lot of management, to that. So tell me, because it's ground truth system. What does that mean? Tell me the story behind that. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's a military term, ground truth, and what it means is you trust the boots on the ground more than you do the aerial photography, the reports that you may have about the enemy, the type of land that you're fighting on, and it really originated from Civil War. And so the real quick picture on that was there was a seminal battle at Gettysburg, and the South had reached its high point. There was a gentleman, Pickett, who his job was to attack, obviously, the forces. The challenge that he ran into was that when he looked at the terrain from his point of view, it looked like a slight uphill slope, and that he should be able to take over this, what seemed like a fairly unguarded farmhouse the Northern troops had. Challenge was, from his perspective, he had also gotten some reports from the field that said, hey, it may be a different terrain than you're looking for or that you think you're going into. He ignored all the reports that he got, and he didn't walk the field himself. So from his point of view, he started the attack. There's actually a cross that marks the high point of the Confederacy. They ever made it in Northern Territory because he ignored that. And so when you look at the other side, from the northern side, it was deep ravines, it was booby traps, it was, barbed wire, dead cattle. It was a bad setup. And so if he had had all the information from actually having walked the ground, then he would have taken a different approach tactically and strategically. He probably wouldn't have had a full frontal attack. And so when I went into the business world, what I found is, if you're a rep, the chances are you don't think your manager is probably the best thing you've ever met. You're like, the guys or girls, he doesn't really get it. They don't know what I'm facing out there every day. They're giving me sales training that doesn't really apply. If you're a sales manager, you're not getting the information you need from the team. So you're carrying information back to that executive team, and they're not listening because our sales, leaders, they have a seat at the executive table. We don't have a voice. Mm-hmm. And so we almost become like the stepchildren that were adopted that are like, hey, just go and sell. Yep. Why are you bothering us with all this information? Because your job is to go and take marketing's message and our great product and just go sell it.
Yep.
And the managers and the reps are going, hey, you're not giving me the information I need. Nobody's listening. And so you have all kinds of issues that come from that. And so the system came from the idea that, look, you need somebody who's been there, done that, that's walked the team, that's been there, carried the bag, had the management responsibility, had the visionary responsibility, and who understands what it looks like to be in those roles, but isn't so deeply involved in the organization that I carry a quota.
Yep.
And so the idea was, it's not that if you're head of the sales organization, it's not that you likely don't know what needs to happen, but there's 23 different roles that you fill. Chances are you're successful knowing 2 or 3.
Yep.
And what you don't know as the company grows can cause it to stall.
Yep.
And so that's the idea, was that, coming in from a fresh perspective, whether I was the manager, the rep, the national sales manager, when I came in, I could see what was there, but 90 days later, I get sucked into the quota, and next thing you know, I can't make any of the changes.
Right.
Because those executive teams,
Yep.
they don't really know how to process the information that comes from somebody in sales, because we speak a different language.
Yep. No, totally. And so one of the things I know you do is an assessment. And one, it's the assessment, because you can do this as small or as grandiose as you want. So one assessment is you can profile the whole sales team, and you can really identify, the strengths and really the weaknesses, because the strengths are easy. We in sales, we usually can see those. It's the weaknesses that sometimes we can't put our finger on because we expect everybody to be doing what we're doing, I think. So I think, what that's powerful is kind of some of the things you showed me about the assessment of the sales team, but then it's also kind of the assessment of the different silos, from account management to sales to management, right? So you kind of, everybody can see everybody, see where everybody's strengths and weaknesses are, and especially from a management position. So explain to me those assessments, what you've seen and how you fixed it.
Yeah, so there's really three sides to getting a sales plan executed on. You got to have the right butts in the right seats at the right times, the right people, right situation, right skill set. Second one is I have to have a process that's going to support them. So that's the sales framework, the selling process, whatever you call it, however you deliver your unique selling proposition and why somebody should do business with you, right? And then the final thing is that the product messaging actually gets communicated.
Yep.
And so when you think about those different groups, there's a couple of things. One is, when you look at a sales team, I can't tell you how many times I've had high-performing sales reps that are then required to put all this data into a CRM.
Yep.
And so somebody that's counting beans in the back end says, I want to know what our margins are. Somebody then marketing wants to know what the conversion rate is, and somebody inside product wants to know what message are we using and which products are resonating. To them, it's 31 clicks on a mouse. To a rep, at the end of the day, you're like, this is ridiculous. This has nothing to do with me selling and closing business.
That's right.
So why do we lose $1 million a year producer? Because, we ask them to do all this busy work that's not what they do.
Right.
I mean, you wouldn't get a tight end in football who has a long memory. Why would you want a sales rep who's going to need to go put all this data in?
Right.
They're going to do over analytics. They're going to be overthinking it. I mean, when Gronkowski went across the middle, you need that guy to take the hit next play, go, man, give me that ball. I got it.
Right.
Let's do it again. You don't want him thinking calculated. Wow, that was really tough last time I went to that, across the middle. That Urlacher was a tough play. No, you want that guy out there. And so if there's a way to identify that, what these people's strengths are. And if somebody, a lot of times I look at these job ads and they say, I want somebody who's a visionary strategist, who can go and find new business, who can hunt it, manage it, develop the relationship, continue to upsell and cross-sell. And by the way, I want them to be able to bake cookies and bring lemonade every day. You just described like 6 different people.
Right.
And you're really going to end up with the least offensive salesperson who is average. And so how do we identify first what we're looking for right now? Because that shifts as an organization develops. And then finally, how do I make sure that person is empowered? Right. I mean, one of the things we talked about was that in the Marine Corps, there's 8 support personnel behind every one Marine that's in the field.
That's right.
Yet how many people in your organization are supporting that frontline sales rep? They're who's bringing the money in. If product sells, you're right, you don't need a sales force. But in a global economy, your product's going to be replicated before you can breathe.
That's right.
By companies that have deeper pockets, better marketing. So how are you going to get the right reps in the right time? So one of the assessments is looking at the people. Do we have square pegs and round holes? Do I have people that are in the selling role, but they're under stress and duress? We need a way to identify that so I can get ahead of those attrition issues. Because like you said, when a sales rep leaves, it's not just the performance that they leave behind. It's how long does it take for us to get a new rep in the seat, ramp them up, and make them effective.
Right.
So that's just from the seller's perspective. So that's the people side. The other one is that, I speak sales. So let's say that I speak English, but my marketing department speaks Spanish and finance speaks Greek. The 3 of us together getting at a table are all talking, nobody's listening, and nobody understands what they're saying.
Yep.
And so, most sales managers, they don't understand how to have a conversation with finance in order to get the money they need to compensate their reps or to drive behaviors. if the compensation plan is misaligned and we're going to go and take a new product to market, maybe we're going to sit down and say we want to grow by 15% this year. That's a CEO's top line because he's got to report to a board or because that's just his growth goal. But what kind of 15%? Is it 15% new sales and 15% more to each customer? Those are two totally different business models. Or maybe it's I need to grow my sales force by 15%. If you think that putting more butts in the seat is going to grow your business by 15%, you're not understanding the delay that happens from the time you hire a rep to the time they're productive. So all of these are, take three simple goals: top line sales growth, grow more revenue by getting more in each client, and then growing the sales force. Those require three different compensation strategies, three different support structures, and three different approaches to the market. But many times when I talk to companies, they just say 15%. And so you can understand that without getting too deep into it, that if you have conflicting goals on the team, even if you have the right people in the right seats at the right time, but we don't have an aligned mission, there's no way we're going to hit those goals. Because even if we do, we can have all kinds of consequences. We blow out our compensation budget. We lose our reps because we're expecting them to be what they're not. Or we burn out our customers because we're going in with a product message that doesn't resonate with them, or a rep that can't support it. So when you think about it, the assessments look first at the people, but then it looks at the process. Yep. And then finally it looks at the support behind it to say, do we have those 8 people aligned behind getting that one rep successful? And so it sounds fairly complicated, but it's really not. At the end of the day, it's very simple. I got to have the right people in the right seats at the right time. I've got to have a unified message that goes throughout the organization, and I need to make sure that the support is aligned around those people.
Yep. You know, one thing that you said there was a lot to unpack. But let me just give you a couple examples that I've seen. Is expense reports. Every salesperson in the world hates doing an expense report. Right. And when I was carrying the bag as a financial wholesaler, we had $100,000 budgets. And so here I was in the field tracking a $100,000 budget, running 20 meetings a week, tracking a $100,000 budget and doing an expense report. So here I am making multiple 6 figures, doing $15 an hour work that was just pissing me off and my manager off. So how do you remove some of that $15 an hour work so somebody can go out there and sprint harder and faster at what brings in money? Because 4% of activities are driving 64% of results, and so you have to identify those top activities for a sales rep to make sure they're crushing the top line.
That's right.
And so I've seen that so much, and it drives me crazy. And the other thing too is compensation. This has always driven me absolutely bananas because it's misaligned. I wouldn't say 100% of the time. I've seen 2 companies, one I worked at, one my wife worked at, that got the compensation right. And typically they want to level set compensation across the country. And what they do is they piss off the top reps. They piss off the guy or lady in Chicago or New York because they're subsidizing the guy or lady in Missouri or Kansas City. And so, I know there's a delicate balance there, but it never is aligned to push top line revenue, because when you're paying somebody and they realize, hey, if I run 3, 4, 5 more appointments, it's not going to geometrically grow my income. Salespeople aren't running those meetings. And so I had a gentleman who's now the COO of a large insurance company. He was a national sales manager at a couple other companies, ask me for this same, advice is, how do you drive compensation to drive behavior? And that's ultimately, you need to write that down. Compensation is driving behavior. You want your sales reps to run an extra 5 meetings? You know what? Think back when you were a sales rep. If you weren't getting paid for those 5 meetings, chances are you weren't running them if you were a top performer, right? And so it's always been a disconnect. So doing remedial jobs, compensation, and really, how do you build that culture? And that's what's so unique about your system, is that it's customizable to that actual to the sales team, to the distribution team, and so I think that's really interesting. Now, I don't think you touched on this because one thing I saw that you had and is a employee turnover calculator, and why I think this is so important is because divisional managers are typically only paid on top line sales. But then when you get to national sales managers, they're a little bit of both. I don't know if they're running P&Ls all the time, but what I know they're doing is they're held accountable for that expenses going out and accountable for their allowables and that top line. So explain to me employee turnover, what you see and how you fix it, because I don't think management is aware enough of this and how it impacts, number one, top line sales, because salespeople, that's all we care about in sales management, but also how it's going to affect the bottom line for that that manager that might be running that P&L.
Yeah, and same here is a lot to unpack, so I'm sure we'll do a series of podcasts around this. If you're listening, feel free to tune in to Matt and Raleigh's podcast.
Right.
But, one of the things you talked about was the cost of attrition in a sales force. And so what we're focusing on here is those reps who carry bag to go get new quota, to go get new business. And so it took me, I'd say 5 years to really understand as a manager what those levers were. Because if I think attrition, I think, okay, I'm going to lose a head count. They have X dollars per month they're supposed to bring in. I'll have a couple of months, where they're not going to be there, but I'll just pick up their pipeline and close it. And so it really won't be that big of a deal. And so most of the time when we look at attrition, if you get any kind of a buffer, and a buffer for those that aren't in sales management simply means if your reps have X dollars per year they're supposed to bring in, you multiply X times the number of reps, that gives you your quota.
Right.
Now, manager quota is usually some fraction lower than that because you realize that not every rep is going to hit full quota. Now, in some companies, it rarely is it more as a manager. Some it's parity, meaning exactly the same. But I always vastly underestimated because I didn't know what levers to look for. Because again, if I'm a high-performing rep, you put me in a management role, I know one thing about you. You know how to sell. But I know something you don't know if you hadn't been in management, and that has very little to do with your effectiveness as a manager. And one of the most effective metrics you're going to have as a manager is it's the art of getting work done through others.
Right.
Meaning I cannot do as much as a team can do. Doesn't matter how good I am. So we'll talk about diminishing effects of sales managers another time, but those levers are pretty simple. The first one is I need to know what the rep was producing when they left. We usually know that. That's not usually a challenge.
Right.
We need to know the pipeline that they have inside that it's going to close anyway. Challenge, though, as you and I both know, is if they like Matt and then Raleigh shows up, I got to pick up the pieces. That pipeline just dropped at least in half.
Right.
I mean, it is not anywhere near the forecast we originally had.
That's right.
The third thing I got to know is how long is that position open in my company? Meaning, if you leave today, how long does it take me to find a high-performing rep to fill it? Mm-hmm. And in today's economy, we're really at full employment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. That's another whole episode. But when you're at full employment, what you're doing is you have to pull people from other organizations, right? In order to do that, I have to have an attractive plan that can lure them over.
That's right.
And part of that is if I'm trying to bring them in, I need to show them that they can ramp quickly. Meaning if I leave a book of business behind and I have to go to a new company, means I have to have time to build that book of business. So the levers are these, the simpler ones. What is the attrition rate in my company? If you don't know that right now, get with HR, find out what it is. That attrition rate means if I have a team of 10 people, how many people leave every year in turnover? Usually it's 25 to 40%, meaning 2 to 4 people out of that team, either unplanned or planned, go to the competition, retire, quit, or you get rid of them. Mm-hmm. Either way, it's the same impact. Second one is how long does it take me to focus on those? Mm-hmm. So if it's 90 days is a very low time to have that position open these days at full unemployment, but we'll take 90 days. The other one I need to know is how long does it take for me to ramp them? Yep. And then I need to know those are basically the ones. Sorry. Yeah. So those are the ones that I need to know in order to effectively, look at, how, and onboarding time. Sorry, that's the other one. How long does it take me to onboard them? So when I take those factors, it is a significant impact to my manager quota. Anywhere between 15 to 20% of my overall number is what it's going to cost me every year. But I'm only getting a 3 to 5% buffer, which means right now in March, into March, you're looking at your quota and going, I'm going to hit this. Chances are you're not falling behind yet because we almost always give a layup in Q1 to our sales managers thinking we're going to hockey stick it towards the end of the year as they build out their sales funnel. My guess is most managers listening who have been in this situation know around July or August, they start to see that their rep is hitting their numbers, but they're not hitting theirs. Yep. And that's the reason the average head of sales has an 18-month life expectancy these days.
Wow.
And so this is a piece that I never thought of. And so this ties directly back to, do I have the right compensation strategy? Meaning, how do I move the middle? Am I over incentivizing reps for incremental value? Meaning, if I got reps that are 60 to 80% of quota, how do I get them to 90%? Because if I got a team, that's what's going to drive it.
That's right.
And so that goes right back to the attrition. So we have an attrition calculator I created. It's available online. You go to my site. I'll make it available for Matt. Yep. You can download it. You can do it right online. It'll send the results to you, and then give us a call. We'll walk you through what that looks like.
Yep. No, that's very cool. So, last kind of a big bite-sized chunk here is, so you do an assessment, you tell me where my shortcomings are. You do an assessment of my turnover, and now I know the variables that are really impacting that top line sales growth. So, give me a little bit of flavor of how do you take me from those gaps you're going to show me to filling those gaps and success?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different processes we follow. The first is an introductory call, so we can learn more about what you're looking at. So obviously there's three things that every CEO gets held accountable for: growing top line sales, increasing profit, or sustainable scalability. So those are the three things that we need to focus on. So one of the things we'll start with is, how did you do against sales last year, right? And if you hit them, why'd you set your goals so low? Right? Do you not trust your team? Did you not understand the market? Right? Because under forecasting is just detrimental to over forecasting. You end up in all kinds of cash flow.
Yep.
The second thing we got to look at is the assessments that we do. So the simplest assessment we can do and we can send out immediately is around the people. And so we can identify those square pegs and round holes through a simple assessment that we send out. It takes less than 10 minutes to complete. The third thing that we do is we'll set up a series of interviews. So when I was a combat journalist, when I showed up and took a general's time, I needed to have a focused set of questions that could drive the outcome that we needed, which was the article around a specific topic. We'll meet with the executive team, and those executive people, 15 to 20 minute conversations, very focused questioning around identifying those gaps, those critical stall points that could happen. Again, when you go see a doctor, it doesn't take him 5 hours to do a diagnosis. He comes in, checks a few vitals. He's able to give you a diagnosis. They may say, well, let's run some more tests. That's exactly what we do.
Yep. No. So, okay, so I got that now, right? So how do you help me close the gap? Do you train my manager? Do you have an online system? What type of trainings or what do you recommend from there once I have that, and how do you deliver that?
Yeah, so it really depends upon the pieces that, hey, here's the things we're good at. Here's the things we suck at.
Right.
Do we care about the things we're not good at? Because a lot of the times when about 15 years ago, there was this whole industry around business that was around focusing on your negative consequences, meaning things that you weren't good at.
Right.
So what we say is, no, what we first got to do is figure out, is there an alignment behind it? So we believe prescription without diagnosis is malpractice.
That's right.
So, there are literally dozens of solutions that we at Wheeler Wilkins have to deliver, whether that's compensation planning, whether that's sales manager competencies that we're going to work to develop, whether that's making sure that the sales reps have the training that they need at the front line, or it could be a support structure. How do we take and hire, a lot of the times when we talk about growing a business, we say we're going to go have outside sales reps who are going to go crush new business. That's great when you're in growth mode, but at a certain period of time, one of the large clients that I had, one of their challenges was that they're bringing in new business, but they're losing it as quick as they brought it in because no one was supporting them, because the rep that gets the business is likely not the right archetype for the ones that's going to support the business, develop the relationships, and continue to upsell within it. Your true hunters don't want to sit around and field strip the game and then make sure that they take every bit of meat off their bones. They want to go hunt something else. So when we do that, a lot of the times this assessment, what we'll do, the first step is we'll run the assessment. The second set is we'll get back with the executive team, usually the CEO or the person that's in charge of scaling that organization, give them the report. From that, we put an action plan together which focuses on those things that are low proficiency and have high impact. And the only way to know that is to go in and do that assessment. And so it's a fairly non-invasive assessment, but we'll have a report that we give back to, and then we'll come up with a plan that's either, implementation immediately, and then we'll look at it from a perspective of what's the end goal that we have for the end of this year, 18 months, 24 months, and work backwards. So there's some things we're going to do to triage. Marine Corps, first thing we got to do is restore the breathing. If you can't breathe, it doesn't matter how bad you're bleeding because you're going to be dead in less than 3 minutes.
Right.
Okay. Second thing we got to do is look for bleeding, anything that's excessive bleeding. The third thing we do is we look for the other wounds and we treat for shock. Right. Those are the things you have to do when you're triaging an individual who's had a combat situation injury. Same thing in your organization. When do you want to find out you have a problem? Once it's become apparent, when it first has a symptom, that's when you want to find it. And so what we do is we have a patented diagnostic system that we can go in and identify these things before they become an issue. Because once they're an issue, there's a whole lot more work that has to happen. And a lot of the times we go in and we say, hey, here's some stall points that you probably didn't even realize you have, because everybody, this is Darren Walter, one of my best mentors I ever had, said, Riley, when you get promoted into sales management or any management, your team is not the team that reports into you. That's who you're responsible for. And we're big believers in servant leadership, meaning I got to take care of the people that work for me. But more important than that, in the Marine Corps, it was mission then men. Your men were important, but you had to accomplish the mission. Imagine the chaos that would happen if I tried to preserve every man in my platoon at the expense of taking that hill.
Yep.
I want to preserve it with everybody in the platoon.
That's right.
But we got to make sure that we're getting the goal. So when I become a manager, my team now becomes the finance, operations, our marketing department, HR. That's my team.
Yep.
And that's who we need to be aligned behind the CEO's vision. If we go into creating our own little fiefdoms and it's all about my sales team and marketing is all about their marketing team and finance is all about the bean team and they got to count things and make sure they're going, I tell you, the finance guy will save you out of business. The marketing guy will tell the message and expect it to sell. The product guy thinks the widgets are going to come off the shelf anyway. And the sales team is just being over-metriced, overburdened, under-understood, undercompensated, misaligned. And they go to the job every day to take that hill.
That's right.
And so all we're doing is giving you a perspective of all those different pieces. It's not rocket surgery. But no, everybody is so busy closing new business or working in their job function that they don't have the time or the skill set to understand what are those competencies that we need from a selling perspective. No slam on them. They are the best at the world at what they do. It's the reason you have in your organization. But who's pulling them all together?
Yep.
That's what we do.
That's right. Something you said there is so powerful. Revenue and sales are going to cure all. And I've only seen 2 companies that align that message and align that culture to drive sales and drive top line growth. So really what you're saying is the ground truth system is a custom approach. See, I think that's so powerful. I remember when I started in wholesaling, here I am making a few $100,000 and, doing presentations, and now I'm a world-class speaker. They trained me. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. And guess what? It didn't sell anybody. Mm-hmm. It was something off the shelf that 2 old ladies, I don't know how, I think they're old now, that pulled off and had no idea of sales. And so I had to go and seek out other training that was more customizable to selling, not just telling, but to selling. And it always drove me bananas. So really, your custom approach is what's so awesome here. And it's driven by that frontline assessment. You have that assessment, you find the gaps. How do you align the teams? And then how do you train people, just to fill those gaps? And at the end, what I really think it boils down to is what you're saying is discipline of the system and process that you put in place to close your gaps, and then that accountability metric. And so, I think this is fantastic, and just, in not sake of time, because we can unpack this, we can keep going. I think we should do a series of these. I love your system so much, the Ground Truth system. It's unbelievable, just how well-rounded it is to break down those silos, find those gaps through assessment all the way through. How can people find out more from you? I mean, I'm gonna put this on my site. I'm gonna put the links to those different diagnostics so people can take those 10-minute tests, find out their gaps, and then even send it to their team and start seeing their gaps. We'll give it to them for free. Share with them their shortcomings so they can start fixing them themselves, let alone hiring us, right, or hiring yourself. So tell me a little bit. How do they find out a little more about the Ground Truth system, and where should they go?
Yeah, well, they can go to your site, obviously, Matt. They can go to my site as well, which is wheeler-wilkins.com. That's our overall company. Ground Truth system, obviously, is the system that we use. So you said a couple things I want to unpack before we close.
Yep.
And so one of those is this idea of custom. And so, when your company is growing, whether it's sales reps, the message, the product, we're all growing these days. We wouldn't buy a custom suit for a child that's 12 years old who's grown up, right? But we also wouldn't want something off the rack because one size fits all fits nobody at all.
That's right.
And so if you end up with a custom designed suit or a custom designed sales process, what ends up happening is you outgrow it before you can even implement it. And so what we did is we modularized best practices, meaning all the benefits of a custom bespoke suit, but without having to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
You could do all of this yourself, likely, if you had enough people and put them together and had enough time. The limiting factor is time and knowledge, right?
Yep.
Then the ability to synergize and implement it. A lot of the times consultants come in, and I hate the word myself because the consultant comes in and tells you what you already know, and great, that's validation. That's what McKinsey gets paid for. It's what Bain gets paid for.
Right.
They validate an idea. Every once in a while they have a finding. They publish a book. It's great. Challenge is that no one sticks around long enough to make sure that it's implemented.
Yep.
And that's what we do. We take a holistic approach to your organization, meaning instead of bringing in, a lot of the times a VP of sales, if they're really good at growing revenue, they're really good at going to get new sales, maybe they're really good at hiring, chances are they're not going to be data analytic and metric driven.
Yep.
Okay. But you need somebody that can do that and help support that individual.
Yep.
If you've got a VP of sales who can, or a sales manager who can't drive sales and hire and recruit, you got the wrong guy.
That's right.
Wrong girl. You need to find somebody that can do that. But don't burden them with all these other pieces and expect them to be everything. If you get a one-size-fits-all manager, you're going to have a one-size-fits-all company that's going to be vanilla and generic and no one's going to want it.
Yep.
So one of the things they do is go to my site, go to your site, download these tools. Download the attrition calculator. It's a great way for us to get started, right?
Yep.
Reach out. There's a link for you to click on to take this assessment. We'll go ahead and take you through a real quick questionnaire. I'll do it with you one-on-one just because we're on the show today.
Yep.
The other piece around that you mentioned is, around, how do we make sure that the diagnostics are easy to execute on? I think, what did you say, Matt? Something around how do they get the diagnostic? How do we implement it? What was it?
Just how the system of closing the gap, really.
Yeah.
So how do you get that assessment, find out the problems, if you will, and then take them through to fixing that problem, really, because those are blind spots. You're giving them blind spots, and they're the unknowns in their business, really, is what you're showing them. So
yeah, and it's the unknowns and then stitching it together.
Right.
So think of it like a quilt. You have all the different pieces that need to go. But what's the challenge is, and this is the challenge we all run into, is that there's a business I made and there's a business I own.
Right.
The business I made challenge probably doesn't even exist.
Right.
I cannot tell you the number of times I sit with a CEO who wants to pull up files from his organization that were from when he developed it,
right.
but the world has shifted.
Yep.
Things don't move at the speed of sound, they move at the speed of social,
right.
and they move at the speed of technology.
That's right.
And so when I first started selling, and your company and whoever's listening right now, your business when you're growing it's all about new logos. But at a certain point, that message is going to hit saturation.
Right.
So your product's going to evolve, the pitch evolves, your customer evolves, the structure needs to evolve. And so if you have the wrong structure at the wrong time, even if you have a great message, it's not going to get delivered.
Yep.
So think about the quick use case or case study. If you've got an organization and they have a widget that they're selling into the marketplace, but then a competition enters. At first, it was just about getting people to hear your message. But if they've got a Me Too message and it sounds the same, then they're going to go with the lowest cost because in their mind it's commoditized.
Yep.
The reality is what you need to do is then get a sales rep who can focus on the delivery of the pitch
Yep.
to go in the nuances of the sell, which means that I have to get more people on the line than I used to. But it's not about a numbers game. How many times do you hear make 100 calls a day?
Right. Continuously.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was what I came up in, and they were like, they had something called a 100-point day when I started.
That's right.
And it was they had all these quantifications on metrics that probably worked 5 years ago.
Right.
And so I tried to follow their system as a rep, and I failed.
Right.
I was the worst performing rep on the worst performing team in the worst performing division in America.
Right.
Okay, that's not a good place to be, Matt.
Right.
Okay, what happened? I, like you, went out on my own, found training that actually fit what I needed to do right then.
Right.
And it was focused around customers. It wasn't everybody. If a numbers game, I'll give you a phone book and you can make your numbers look really good by calling every number in there, starting with Adams and ending with Zabrowski.
Yeah.
But that's not how people buy. So what I needed to do was get more targeted in my selling approach. I went from making 100 calls a day to making 43 to 44 calls a day. But there were focused calls around what I needed to know with the message that I was delivering to a very targeted market.
That's right.
That system took me from the worst performing rep and the worst performing team, the worst performing division and the worst performing region in America to being the number 4 rep in the country out of over 300 reps within 9 months of me doing it.
Yep.
That is a significant shift in ranking.
Yep.
So how did I do that? When I put it all together, I'm not going to take you through on this podcast, but I do it in another. When I did that, I had people calling me in the C-level at this multi-billion-dollar organization saying, Riley, you're only doing 43 to 44 metrics a day. What if you did 100 calls? And I said, what if everybody did 43 to 44?
Right.
Because you want average? Do you want the metrics? You can get great metrics, or do you want great results?
Right.
That's what we're about, results. And we got to get your team aligned around that. And a lot of the times, like I said, your sales manager has a seat at the table. They have no voice.
Yep.
But you got to listen. But a lot of the times, they don't know how to articulate it.
Yep.
Because they're new in their career, too. What if you had somebody that could come in and give you that voice at the table, but also the impartial viewpoint?
That's right.
That's what we do.
Hey, here's the bottom line here when we're talking is this. If you, as a sales manager, want to guarantee your tenure is longer than 18 months, you need a complete system like the Ground True system to integrate and create that culture and close those gaps. I've seen this so many times. When I was working with MetLife, gentleman was there, in and out in 18 months. I was working with a lot of different companies, managers, in and out, 18 months. So you don't want this to be you. And so how do you install that culture? Because here's the deal. You don't have the time to do it. So you have to understand, like, hey, what is that culture? What is that system and process that I'm going to implement? So if you want to extend your executive career at the company you're at longer than 18 months, I mean, that's just the averages, then you need a system like the Ground True system. If you want to continue to grow your sales and see 150% growth, which is common with the Ground True system, then you need a system like the Ground True system. And so really ultimately is how do you get better and close the gaps from where you're at to where you want to be within your business and create the longevity for your sales team, for your executive team, and break down those silos throughout your organization. Is the Ground True systems the one that's going to do it for you. So go check out the links that we talked about here in this podcast, and check out the links on the website here. We'll give you a link to the Ground True system. We're going to give you links to a couple assessments. They're less than 10 minutes, a couple calculators, and you'll already start improving your sales team, crushing your sales, and guaranteeing your longevity in the business. So, hey, man, Raleigh, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Appreciate it, man.
I wanna get restless.